G'day guys, Sean Dove here, back with another Cinema 4D quick tip. Today I wanted to take a look at how we can create this fun text inflation animation, and we're going to be using the pose morph tag to drive the whole thing. To initially set this up, we're going to be using a technique that EJ from R20 has recently shown us. In his tutorial, he shows us how to create these cloth inflation simulations and get some absolutely amazing results. So what we're going to do is take that technique and art direct an inflated and deflated state of our text, and then we'll use the pose morph tag, a bit of the new falloff system to have full control over the animation between the two. Make sure you also check out EJ's tutorial. His understanding of cloth and anything Cinema 4D for that matter is second to none, and I do owe a lot of what I know to him. Cheers, EJ. With that said, let's jump in, we'll have a play.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, you beautiful bastards.
All right, I've got Cinema booted up in front of me. Let's jump in and start having a bit of a play. So I'm thinking, let's have a go at creating that little $ inflation test that I was having a play with. So let's come into MoGraph, come down and we'll select Mo Text. I'm going to change our text to a $ and just align this to the middle of our scene. I'm going to change our font as well here. What I found worked quite nicely with this technique was just using something quite simple like Helvetica New. We'll then change that from regular to bold, make it a little bit chunkier. It's looking a little bit funky with the thin stem through the middle there. So I'm actually going to try something different. Maybe Gotham. Yeah, Gotham bold looks better. Our stroke through the middle is looking a bit more uniform with the overall shape, and that's ultimately going to work a bit nicer for us. All right, so let's zoom in. I'm going to hit NB on our keyboard to reveal our polygons. And what we need for this technique is to have quite a dense mesh. So with our Mo text selected, let's come over to caps. And first off, I'm going to select create single objects. Let's select that. And then we'll come down to our type. And I'm going to change this to quadrangles. And already we're starting to add some further geometry into our scene. Let's hit regular grid and we'll knock this right down. I'm going to set this at 2 for now. And when we zoom in, you can see our edges aren't looking as uniform for us. So let's come over to the Object tab, and we can actually fix this by changing how the points on that spline are interpreted. So we'll change this to subdivided, and then the maximum length, let's also set that to 2. And already that's starting to look a bit better for us. I'm going to spin around, and next we're going to have to fix up the extrude here. So let's just start increasing our subdivisions so it looks somewhat even to the front. And right now 15 subdivisions is working perfectly. And with the extrude depth, I might just slightly increase that a little bit, maybe 25. What I want is for the depth to be a similar size to the actual face here. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Just going to hit S on my keyboard to frame that up. All right, now that we've got our geometry set, it's time to have a play creating that inflated state. I'm going to rename this to $. Let's make a copy of that just so we can come back to it, our base mesh if we need to. All right, nice. Now that we've got our copy here, let's hold down Alt, and we're going to drop this into a connect object. With our connect selected, let's hit C, and great, we've now collapsed that mesh. All right, great. So what do we need to do now? Before we go any further, I'm going to grab our edge selection tool, hit UL, and we want to grab all these outside loops. Trying to grab this little bugger, there we go. Holding shift, just moving around, grabbing all the outside loops of our geometry here. Spin around and do the same thing on the back. Beautiful. Spin around, frame this up again. I'm going to come up to select and say set selection. We've now got this little tag on our object, and that's saving that selection for us. We don't need it right now, but we are going to need it in a little bit, so having that pre-selected is just going to make things far easier for us. All right, so like I said, to build this, we're going to be using that cloth technique that EJ demonstrated. So let's rename this our dollar mesh. Come up to tags, and we're going to add a cloth tag. All right, nice. So first up, let's come over to our forces, and we're just going to zero out that gravity. And what this is going to do for us is just make sure it stays in that position. It's not going to start free falling. We can then also add a little bit of drag which is just going to help the animation with a bit of that easing, and just a little bit will go a long way with that. And what EJ also did was just zero out any of that wind interference. We were not going to need any of that for this technique. Nice. Now if I hit play at the moment, we're going to see nothing happens. But if we come over to the tag tab, this is where we can start having a bit of fun. Now the stiffness, I'm going to drop this down to about 70. Zero out the flexion, but it's actually this size parameter that's going to allow us to really have a bit of fun with this. Let's increase this straight away to 125. So if we think about this, currently our mesh is at 100% of its size. So now that we've increased it by 25%, if I hit play, you can see that balloons out. It's now wanting to be 25% bigger. All right, great. This is already starting to look pretty cool. Now to blow this up, we're going to be using an attractor. So let's grab that and drop it into our scene. Just going to jump into our 4 views and make sure it's positioned center of this mesh here. And with this one for now, let's just pull it up so it's in the middle of our geometry. Jump back into our perspective view. Let's hit play to see what that does for now. All right, so our attractor is sucking in that mesh. So that's not what we want this to do. So let's come over to the strength here and let's do something like -20. Let's hit play again. And there we go. It's starting to blow up this mesh. Now it looks good in the middle here, but that attractor it's also pushing the top and bottom of our geometry, and that's not what we want. What we want the attractor to do is inflate our geometry and not create this awkward pushing and pulling effect. So let's pause that, and a way to have a bit more control over the attractor is to give it a fall off. So let's come over to the fall off tab. I'm just going to add a spherical fall off. Now this is quite a big size, so let's drop this down. I'm going to drop this by half. Let's make it 50 centimeters. And that still is looking quite big. I'm going to go smaller again. Let's go 20. Nice. Let's hit play now. And you can see that attractor is only having effect over where the spherical fall off is. Let's jump into our 4 views for a second. Just going to pause that. Now what I found we want here is for the inner fall off ring to match about the width of our mesh. So let's just increase our size a little bit. And 25 looks like it's going to be the magic number for us here. Zoom out again. Let's hit play. That's already starting to look better for us. It's no longer creating this awkward push and pull of the mesh. Now this is great, but the attractor is only affecting the middle of our geometry here. Now unfortunately we can't create multiple spherical fall-offs. If I do that, just to demonstrate, and move this other fall-off above it, rather than inflating this top section, what's going to happen is we're going to get a little bit of the effect from where the attractor is. I hope that makes sense. Let's delete that spherical fall-off, and what we actually need to do is create multiple attractors to start inflating our geometry here. So I'm going to jump into our front view, frame up our mesh, and grab our initial attractor and just pull it to the start of our geometry. Now hitting Command C, Command V, pasting that into our scene, we've now created a new attractor. I'm just going to pull this over, and I hope you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, I'm just framing up the inner circle of that fall off to hit about where the previous one was. All right, so about there looks good. Let's copy that one. Just going to pull this up a little bit. We're going to fill that top section, create a new one. And as you can see here, I'm just duplicating our attractors and repositioning them around our geometry here. We'll fill the S shape of the dollar sign here, and then we'll come back, pop one in the base, and also fill up these inside sections. All right, great. Let's jump back into our perspective view. I'm just going to group all these attractors because we've got quite a few of them now. So I selected them all with Shift, hitting Option G to group them. And we'll just rename that group our attractors. All right, let's have another look at what we've got now. I hit play and look at that. All those separate attractors just have influence over where they're positioned. And that's starting to look pretty cool. We're getting some really nice organic wrinkles in our text. I'm just going to pause that for a second. So we can have a little bit of a spin around here. And nice. This is looking pretty cool. All right, it's looking okay. I think I'm not loving the top and base. I think that's probably what's bothering me the most at the moment. So I'm wondering if we just drop that bottom one a little bit. Let's have another look at that. There we go. That's now filling that mesh a bit better. All right, so I think we just want to do the same thing to the top one here. So that's our second attractor. I'm just going to pull that up a little bit, hit rewind, play that out. Yeah, nice. That's definitely starting to fill that mesh and create a better shape for us. All right, this is looking kind of cool. Let's collapse our attractors again. What we can even do is come a few frames forward here. I'm just framing through, getting a spot that looks kind of cool. And somewhere about there, we're starting to see the complete shape. I'm going to hit NA just to bring us back to our shading. Frame forward maybe a little bit more. Getting a bit of pulling in here. So you can see this is just a little bit of back and forth trying to create a shape that you're really happy with. All right, it's not perfect, but I think this is where we're gonna look at continuing this, and we can actually drop our mesh here into a subdivision surface, and that'll really neaten up that geometry. Let's turn that off for a little bit while we're still playing here. Now this is where we can use that selection that we made earlier to really start to have a bit of fun with how this final look is going to be. So let's double click that edge selection, and that's automatically selected it back onto our mesh here. What we'll need to do is hold down Shift and then toggle over and select our points. And what that'll do is convert it from an edge selection to a point selection. Let's come into our cloth, over to our dresser, and we're actually going to say fix. Oh, before we do that, what we need to do actually is say set initial state. That's now freeze that state. Then we can come down and fix those points. It'll turn them purple. That's indicating they are set. Let's just untick draw so we don't have to see that. Let's come back to frame 0 and you can see it's maintained that shape. Now when I hit play, I'm going to turn on the subdivisions here. We're getting some pretty funky results. And this has been caused from this size still being at 125 because it is now thinking that this initial state is 100% and it's wanting to boost it another 25%. So to start with, let's bring this back down to 100 and hit play. All right, not a heaps going on there. Let's push this a little bit further, maybe 110. Rewind it, hit play. And there we go. I'm going to pause that for a second. Jump out of our camera just so we can spin around our geometry. All right, we've certainly got a lot of detail going on, but I hope you can see that where we made those edges, it's now freezing those points and ballooning it out past that. We can even go the opposite with this size to something like 90. Now when I hit play, it's going to really tighten up on that selection, which can also be a really cool look. And jump back into my camera. All right, well, I'm actually pretty happy with the state that we've got this in right now. I'm thinking, let's call this our inflated state. So all I'm going to do is make a copy of our mesh and just remove that cloth tag. And then when I pull this to the side, we've now got that mesh. As I scrub through the timeline here, you can see it's now unaffected. That is our final state. It's going to undo to pull it back to our center here. I'm just going to hide it for now. All right, so now what we're going to need to do is create a deflated state, and we're going to animate between the two different poses. So let's come over to our cloth tag, come to our dresser, and those points that we selected before to have a bit of a play with, let's just clear them. We won't need any selection. We also need to disable all the attractors. We can leave the subdivision on for now, but those attractors won't be needed for this. I'm actually going to hide the entire group just so we don't see any of those fall off rings in our viewport. So let's come over to our cloth tag. And the size here, what I'm going to do is pull it back to something like 60. So now, considering this is 100%, it's going to shrink in on itself. Now, as I hit play, it's actually going to happen pretty quick. And as I hit pause, you can see that's done a pretty good job at flattening out that mesh. You might not have noticed though, as it does this, you can see right here, we're actually getting some intersection from the back of the mesh to the front. So what we're going to do is come over to our expert tab, and we're going to tick self collision. Now we'll turn off our subdivision surface for this. And what you might find you need to do is actually go frame by frame during this process. You can see our mesh is deflating to that 60% range thanks to that cloth tag. And now with that self collision turned on, we're not going to get any intersection from the back to the front of our mesh. Just going to pause that there for a second, spin around, and this is starting to look pretty cool. Let's turn back on that subdivision surface, and these wrinkles are starting to look really cool. I'm not loving these little bubbles, but for the most part, the wrinkles look great. What we might find, let's just go a couple of frames forward here, zoom out. And essentially now what I'm doing is just finding a state that I'm happier with. And already that's looking better. All right, so I'm thinking let's call this our deflated state. So again, let's make a copy of that mesh, remove the cloth tag, and then we can just hide our working stuff down here. Might even group all of that just so we don't see any of that. And that is our working. So let's rename this. This is our deflated. And this mesh that we created before is our inflated. Let's turn that on just so you can see that. There we go. And our deflated state. I'll zoom out a little bit. Just pull this to the side. And great, so we've now got our two separate states. So let's hide our deflated state for a moment. And on our inflated mesh, what we need to do is add a pose morph tag. So let's hit Shift C and let's type in pose, and there it is, we've got pose morph. Let's double tick that, and we've now got that tag on our mesh. All right, so with our pose morph tag on our mesh, let's come down, and what we're going to be affecting is the points. So let's select that, and instantly it's going to bring us over to the tag. So we've got our base pose, and what this is just that inflated state. Now with our deflated mesh, let's take that, and we're just going to feed this into this hierarchy here. And it'll ask us, do we want to add this as an absolute? And we're just going to hit no here. And there we go, we've now got our deflated state. Look at that. As I toggle between these two, you can see they are both saved into this pose morph. Now that they're both in there, let's leave this edit state and come over to animate. And a real simple way to have a play with this is just by playing with the strength here. And just by increasing this strength, we're able to toggle between those two different states. And what's a bit of fun is we could even go beyond 100% if that was something you wanted to do. All right, nice. So just for example, let's start this at 100% just because that is currently how our deflated pose is. Add a keyframe, come forward about 10 frames. Let's pull that back down to 0. Add another keyframe. Let's hit play on that. And there we go. We've got a fun animation between those two different states. So I'm going to pause that for a second. Now to make this animation a little bit more interesting, let's hit Shift C and type in jiggle. Hit enter, and we'll make this a child of our inflated mesh. Let's hit rewind and have a look at that now. As I play, we get the animation of the morphing between that deflated to the inflated state. But now thanks to that jiggle effect, we're now getting some great secondary animation as this rests into that final state, which really helps sell this whole inflated look. All right, nice. This is looking pretty cool. Let's turn off the jiggle for a moment. Come back to frame 0. I'm just going to remove the keyframes that we set before. Because rather than playing with this slider, I want to have a little bit more control. So a great way we can do that, again, let's hit Shift-C and type in pose. No, we won't. Instead of pose, let's type in morph. Let's try and spell it correctly. M-O-R-P-H, there we go. So that top one, and that's going to add a morph object into our scene. So first off, let's make this a child of our inflate geometry. And you can actually see in the morph tab here, we've actually got that pose morph tag. I'm just going to clear that for a second. So in case that didn't come over for you guys, make the morph object a child of your inflated geometry. And then let's just feed that tag into this morph object. Great, so now this is where we can start to really have a heap of control because this morph deformer has the falloff system. So to have a quick look, let's add a spherical falloff. And now you can see wherever we move this sphere, we're going to get either the inflated or deflated state. And we can shrink this down a little bit. And if we wanted this to go the opposite way, let's grab that spherical falloff, remapping. Let's just invert that for a second. And now wherever it's fed, it's going to start to inflate our geometry. All right, so this is starting to get pretty cool. Let's delete that spherical falloff. We've deleted that spherical falloff, and instead we'll have a play using the linear field. Let's just change this to something like, I think positive y, is that right? Yeah, that's looking good. What we're going to do is create the animation so it inflates from the base here until finally filling out from the top. We might want to shrink this falloff a little bit. There we go. So let's pull it beneath our geometry. We'll add a keyframe. Let's go forward maybe 15 frames here. And we'll pull it above. We'll pull it above so it's completely inflated and add another keyframe. Let's hit play. Now you can see this mesh is quite dense, so we're not getting real-time playback, but it's still happening reasonably quick. All right, great. So that's how we get the inflate from the bottom to the top. Let's now enable that jiggle deformer that we set before, come back to frame 0, hit play again and see what we get now. We get that inflation from the bottom to the top, but that jiggle effector is also adding some secondary animation. We get a nice little bit of undulation of that size as it rests into that final inflated state. Nice, I think that's worked out pretty well for us. Now, of course, we can then take our inflated geometry, add it into another subdivision surface just to add more details into those creases. And I'm pretty happy with this. I think this has come out looking pretty good. So I think the only other thing we can really do to help sell this inflated animation is to get a bit of pop as if it's inflating off a surface. So let's just grab a plane to be our back wall here. Change our orientation to +Z. I'm just going to jump into our 4 views. I'm just going to pull this behind our mesh, close enough to it's going to be fine. We're shooting this from the front. Let's spin around a little bit. What I might even do is just grab our camera, zero it all out. Same with the rotation. And then we can just zoom out a little bit and frame up our geometry. Let's grab that plane, scale it out so it captures our full frame. Great. So within this subdivision surface, we've got that inflated geometry. We've got the morph object controlling the animation through that tag. And then we've just got the jiggle effector to help give it some secondary animation. Now, while we're working, I'm going to turn off that jiggle effector. So let's grab this subdivision surface. And we're going to pop it into another null. So let's hit Alt-G to group that up. And this is our inflation animation. Let's add a keyframe on this null. And what we might even want to do is pull it to about frame 5. That's where we're starting to get a little bit of that inflated geometry. Let's come up to frame 15 where we would be fully inflated. Going to jump into our 4 views. And you can see because it's maintained its position, we're actually pushing through that back wall now. So we don't want to do that. So let's hit E to move this forward. Might even hold down shift, and I'm just going to pull it up in space a little bit, maybe about 60 centimeters, nothing crazy. Just get a little bit of pop off that back wall. Let's add another keyframe. And now as I scrub through the timeline here, you can see we start to inflate before popping up off that wall. I don't know if this cloth tag is slowing us down a little bit, so I'm just going to turn that off from our working files. And maybe that'll, look at that, that's already helped us out a heap. I wish I had done that a little bit earlier. All right, that's all right. So let's grab our inflated animation null. We've got those keyframes between 5 and 15 pushing this up. Now, round about here, what I'm thinking we might do, right in the middle, is just rotate it a little bit, as if the base has actually popped up first. Add a keyframe there. There we go, look at that. The base sort of pushes forward a little bit before the head comes forward. All right, let's jump into our perspective view. Turn on that jiggle effector. Let's have a look. Let's zoom out a little bit. Turn on the subdivision surface. And look at that. That's looking pretty cool. All right, maybe this jiggle effector, we could decrease the drag a little bit. Maybe even the stiffness. Let's pull that down. Let's have a look at that. Here we go, just a little bit of extra bounce, and that's looking pretty cool. All right, nice. All right, before we finish up, I just wanted to have a quick look at the final scene that I was having a play with that you guys have seen. And this was built the exact same way. We've got that inflated and deflated mesh, opposed to former object, which is controlling that fall off, again, just with a linear field coming from that base up. Let's have a look at this one. And there we go, we've got a pretty similar, we actually got a pretty similar result, and I might even be a little bit happier with how we got our final mesh today. All right, this was a bit of fun. Hope you guys can take something away from it. Make sure again to go check out EJ's tutorial. He really goes into how to get a heap of control out of that cloth object. All right, thanks again guys. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers.